Picture this, if you will. It's the winter of 1147 after Christ, somewhere in the rolling hills of what we now call the English countryside. But this isn't the England you might imagine from those romanticized medieval movies. This is a brutal, unforgiving world, where winter doesn't just inconvenience you, it tries to kill you. Lord William de Montfort stands in what used to be his great hall, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air. Now, when I say great hall, don't envision some Hollywood castle with soaring ceilings and blazing fireplaces. This hall lies in complete ruins, a blackened skeleton of stone and charred timber. Greek fire, that terrifying Byzantine incendiary weapon, had done its work during the summer siege. The same substance that had terrorized crusaders in the Holy Land had found its way to this modest English holding, leaving William's household huddled in cramped, freezing quarters like refugees in their own castle. Think about that for a moment. In our modern world, we complain when the thermostat drops a few degrees. These people were living in stone buildings with virtually no heating, wearing every piece of clothing they owned, sleeping under piles of animal furs, and still waking up with ice in their water bowls. Winter wasn't a season, it was a siege that lasted months. Into this frozen desperation, on a day when the snow piled waist-high against Montfort's walls, came a stranger who would change everything. Picture a man in his middle years, riding a pack mule loaded with the strangest collection of instruments anyone in Norman England had ever seen. Brass astrolabes glinted in the weak winter sun. Rolled parchments stuck out from leather satchels like arrows from a quiver, and wooden models of buildings, not crude peasant toys, but precise, intricate constructions that seemed to breathe architectural secrets. This was Master Roland de Byzantium, and his very name whispered of distant wonders. Byzantium, Constantinople, the great city that straddled Europe and Asia, where the ghost of the Roman Empire still lived and breathed. To these Norman lords, it might as well have been another planet. Roland had learned his craft in those warm marble halls where ancient Roman heating methods had never died, where hypocausts still channeled hot air through palace floors just as they had 1,000 years before. He had studied in Damascus, in those soaring Islamic palaces where architects had mastered the art of cooling desert heat with ingenious air currents and water features. But here's what makes this story fascinating and dangerous. William's advisors didn't see opportunity when they looked at this foreign master builder. They saw threat. His marshal, Sir Gerald, a man whose scars told the story of 20 years fighting in the Holy Land, distrusted anything that came from lands beyond Christendom. To Gerald's thinking, knowledge from the East meant sorcery, heresy, corruption. Better to freeze in good Christian suffering than warm yourself with Saracen science. You have to understand the mindset here. This is 1147. The Second Crusade is falling apart in spectacular failure. Tales of Christian defeats are filtering back from the Holy Land, along with disturbing stories about Islamic military superiority, about their superior siege engines, their mathematical precision, their architectural marvels. To many Norman nobles, anything Eastern carried the taint of the enemy. But William de Montfort wasn't most nobles. He was a younger son of a younger son, what they called a cadet branch of his family tree. In our modern terms, he was middle management in the feudal world, desperately trying to climb the ladder in a system that heavily favoured primogeniture. His modest holding would never elevate him above his rivals through conventional means. He needed an edge, something that would make powerful lords take notice, something that would draw the kind of attention that could transform a minor border castle into a centre of influence. The negotiation took place by candlelight in William's solar, his private chamber, and even there, the cold was so intense that the men's breath formed visible clouds as they spoke. Roland didn't waste time with pleasantries. He demonstrated his knowledge by explaining how the Romans had heated their villas with underground furnaces and network of flues, how they had channeled hot air through hollow walls, how they had created comfortable living spaces even in the cold climates of Britain and Gaul. Then he described the Saracen methods, how they channeled cool air through their palaces, how they used wind towers and water to create comfort in the desert heat. What Roland promised was something unprecedented in Norman England, a hall that would be cool in summer and warm in winter without the constant feeding of massive fires, without the suffocating closeness of smoke-filled rooms, without the impossible choice between freezing and choking. A building that would work with natural forces instead of fighting them. The price was steep, twice the normal cost of construction, but that wasn't the controversial part. Rowland also demanded his pick of the brightest young craftsmen as apprentices, men who would learn secrets that had been guarded for centuries, and most shocking of all, he required absolute secrecy during construction. Workers would be sworn to silence. No visitors would be allowed to observe the building process. The very methods that created this marvel would remain hidden. As William's steward Hugo calculated the staggering costs, and as his chaplain Father Benedict muttered prayers against Eastern sorcery, the young lord faced a choice that would echo through history. In that freezing solar, surrounded by advisers who counselled caution, William de Montfort made the decision that would change not just his own fate, but the very nature of how people lived in medieval England. By spring, Master Rowland would begin building something that defied every tradition of Norman construction, something that would be comfortable in ways that seemed impossible, something that would make Montfort Castle a place of wonder and envy. But first, he would have to survive the suspicions of a world that feared innovation almost as much as it feared the cold. And as the winter winds howled around Montfort's damaged walls, as the last candles guttered in the freezing solar, nobody could have imagined that they were witnessing the beginning of a revolution that would spread across medieval Europe like wildfire, carrying with it secrets that would transform not just how buildings were made, but how people lived within them. The die was cast. Come spring, the real work would begin. Spring arrived at Montfort Castle like a general marshalling troops for the campaign of a lifetime. And Master Rowland de Byzantium? He commanded his 300 workers with the precision of a military commander who understood that this wasn't just construction, this was revolution, disguised as architecture. But here's what shocked everyone, and I mean everyone, who watched those first weeks unfold. Rowland didn't begin with foundations. He didn't start laying stones or mixing mortar. Instead, he spent weeks doing something that must have looked like complete madness to medieval eyes. He studied the land itself. Picture this scene. The master builder walking the grounds of Montfort with instruments that gleamed like magical artifacts, marking the path of the sun from dawn to dusk, testing the direction of prevailing winds with silk ribbons that fluttered like prayer flags. He dug mysterious test pits, not for foundations, but to understand how air moved through the soil, how water drained, how the earth itself breathed. To Norman eyes, accustomed to builders who simply found level ground and started stacking stones, this looked like sorcery. Young Thomas the Mason, barely 20 years old, but already showing the calloused hands and sharp eye of a master craftsman, initially viewed this foreign builder with the skepticism of youth. Thomas had learned his trade the traditional way, apprenticed to his father who had apprenticed to his father before him, in an unbroken chain stretching back to the Norman conquest. The idea that some Byzantine stranger could teach him anything about working stone seemed preposterous, until he witnessed Rowland's measurements. Thomas later described that moment as a revelation that changed his understanding of what building could be. Using an astrolabe and mathematical calculations that seemed to pull precision from thin air, Rowland could predict exactly where shadows would fall at any hour of any day throughout the year. He could calculate the angle needed for a window to capture low winter sun while excluding high summer rays. He worked with tolerances measured not in inches, but in fractions of inches, creating fits so precise they seemed supernatural. The construction itself defied every tradition these English craftsmen had ever known. Where normal builders raised solid walls, thick, heavy barriers designed to keep the world out, Rowland created something that seemed alive. Double walls with hollow spaces between them, channels that would carry air like blood through veins. Think about this for a moment. In our modern world, we understand cavity walls. We know about insulation and air circulation. But in 1248, the very concept that a wall could be more than just a barrier was revolutionary. Beneath the floor, Rowland's workers dug a network of tunnels that connected to discrete openings in the surrounding hillside. He called this system the building's lungs, and watching it take shape must have been like witnessing the birth of some great stone creature. These weren't crude holes in the ground, they were precisely engineered channels, lined with stone, angled to capture and direct airflow with mathematical precision. The windows faced specific directions according to calculations that took into account the sun's path throughout the seasons. Each window featured deep recesses with angled tops, designed to welcome the low, warming rays of winter sun while blocking the harsh, heating glare of summer. To medieval builders accustomed to thinking of windows as necessary weak points in defensive walls, this attention to solar orientation seemed absurdly sophisticated. But not everyone was impressed. Local master builders, led by the envious Master Godfrey, who had expected to receive Lord William's commission himself, began spreading rumours that grew more elaborate with each telling. Roland, they whispered, practised dark arts learned in the infidel lands of the East. His precise measurements came from demonic calculation. His understanding of air and heat drew upon forbidden knowledge that Christian builders should shun. These whispers had power. This was an age when the line between science and sorcery was dangerously thin, when mathematical precision could be interpreted as supernatural influence. The rumours reached the Archbishop's court, and soon the bishop's own architect, Master Jean de Rouen, arrived at Montfort to investigate claims of heretical building practices. Jean was no provincial craftsman. Trained in the cathedral schools of France, he represented the pinnacle of orthodox Norman architecture. His buildings were monuments to Christian tradition, massive and permanent, designed to last until the Second Coming. When he examined Roland's revolutionary methods, he saw not innovation, but deviation from proper Christian practice. The confrontation that followed became legendary among medieval builders, spoken of for generations as the Trial of the Halls. It was a public challenge that would determine not just Roland's reputation, but the future of architectural innovation in England. Both masters would construct small demonstration buildings to prove their methods. Roland with his mysterious double walls and underground channels, Jean with traditional thick walls and proper Norman proportions. Through the sweltering summer of 1248, both buildings rose side by side in Montfort's outer courtyard. Jean's hall followed every convention: solid stone walls, 3 feet thick, small windows placed for defence rather than comfort, a central fire pit with smoke holes in the roof. It was exactly what any Norman lord would expect from a proper building. Roland's demonstration chamber seemed impossibly delicate by comparison. Its double walls were thinner than Jean's single wall, yet the space between them created hidden pathways for air circulation. Underground channels connected to the hillside, creating a breathing system that drew cool air from shaded earth. The windows, positioned according to solar calculations, seemed to glow with captured light. The test continued through autumn, and noble visitors came from across England to judge for themselves. The powerful Countess Isabella de Clare, whose favour could make or break a builder's reputation, spent days examining both structures. Lesser lords arrived with their own master builders, eager to witness this contest between old wisdom and new knowledge. When the first frost of winter arrived, the difference was so dramatic it seemed magical. Jean's traditional hall required constant feeding of massive fires to maintain even basic warmth, and even then, cold draughts made the space nearly uninhabitable. Thick smoke from the central fire pit made eyes water and throats burn. The stone walls, designed to keep enemies out, also kept warmth from penetrating, creating a cold, damp environment that seemed to actively drain heat from human bodies. Roland's chamber told a completely different story. Warm air rose from discrete floor vents connected to the hypercaust system below, where a single, carefully managed fire in the underground chamber heated water-filled channels that radiated warmth through the entire foundation. The double walls created their own circulation system, drawing cold air from the bottom and releasing warmed air through hidden vents near the ceiling. The space felt alive, breathing, responsive to human needs in ways that seemed impossible for mere stone and mortar. The victory was so complete that Master Jean himself, setting aside professional pride, asked to study under Roland. Within weeks, this master of traditional Norman architecture became Roland's second most important apprentice after young Thomas, proving that even the most established practitioners could recognize genuine innovation when they experienced it firsthand. But victory in the trial of the halls was just the beginning. Word of Rowland's achievement spread across medieval England like wildfire, and soon Lord William found himself hosting visitors who came not for political alliance or military council, but simply to experience the impossible comfort of a building that seemed to understand human needs. The real test, however, was yet to come. Winter was approaching, the harsh, merciless winter that had driven Lord William to desperation the year before. Would Rowland's revolutionary hall truly prove itself when faced with the full fury of an English winter? The answer would determine not just the fate of one foreign master builder, but the future of how people lived within the walls they called home. Christmas of 1148 arrived at Montfort Castle with a gift that would change medieval life forever. Rowland's great hall stood complete, its stone walls hiding revolutionary secrets, its windows positioned with mathematical precision, its underground channels ready to breathe life into winter's frozen grip. But no one, not Lord William, not Master Rowland himself, could have predicted the true test that was coming. The Feast of Pâr. Epiphany brought a blizzard that would become legendary in the chronicles of that winter. Snow fell for 3 days without pause, driven by winds that howled like demons around the castle walls. Roads disappeared beneath drifts taller than mounted knights. The surrounding countryside became an Arctic wasteland that trapped over 200 guests within Montfort's walls, nobles, clergy, merchants, and their entire retinues, all seeking shelter from nature's fury. In any other castle of that era, this would have been a disaster. Picture 200 people crammed into a traditional great hall, huddled around massive fires that consumed entire trees yet barely warmed the space beyond their immediate glow. The air would have been thick with smoke that burned eyes and throats. Cold draughts would have cut through the crowd like invisible knives. People would have worn every piece of clothing they owned, pressed together for warmth, miserable despite their shelter. But Rowland's creation seemed to breathe with life. Warm air rose from discrete floor vents connected to the hypercaust system below, where a single, carefully managed fire in the underground chamber heated water-filled channels that radiated warmth through the entire foundation. Think about the engineering marvel this represented. While other castles burned forests to heat single rooms inadequately, Rowland's system distributed warmth evenly throughout the space using a fraction of the fuel. The precision required calculating thermal dynamics, water circulation, air pressure was centuries ahead of its time. The double walls created their own circulation system that seemed almost alive. Cold air entered through hidden channels at the base, was warmed as it passed through the cavity between walls, and rose to exit through concealed vents near the ceiling. This constant, gentle circulation eliminated the stagnant cold that plagued traditional halls, creating an environment that felt naturally comfortable, rather than artificially heated. Noble guests marveled at details that revealed the system's sophistication. Tapestries hung still instead of billowing in drafts, a small thing, but revolutionary for people accustomed to constant air movement in poorly sealed buildings. Elderly Lord Pemberton, whose joints had ached every winter for 20 years, found himself moving freely despite the storm raging outside. Ladies could sit comfortably with their needlework far from the central fire, their fingers remaining nimble enough for delicate embroidery. When summer arrived, bringing with it a heat wave that left other castles stifling, Rowland's Hall provided equal amazement by becoming a cool refuge from temperatures that made life miserable elsewhere. The same underground channels that had carried warming air in winter now drew cool air from shaded hillside openings. The clever window angles that had welcomed low winter sun now blocked the harsh direct rays of summer heat. The double walls that had trapped warm air during cold months now insulated against heat, keeping the interior remarkably comfortable. Adjustable wooden panels operated by servants who had been trained in the system's operation allowed precise control of airflow like ship captains trimming sails to catch favorable winds. This wasn't just heating and cooling. It was climate control achieved through pure mechanical ingenuity, centuries before such concepts became commonplace. Life at Montfort transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The scriptorium that Lord William established became the most productive in the region, as monks could work year-round without frozen fingers that couldn't grip pens or heat-dulled minds that couldn't focus on complex texts. Illuminated manuscripts created in Roland's comfortable environment displayed a precision and artistry that reflected the enhanced working conditions. The hall's comfort attracted the finest minstrels and storytellers from across England and beyond. Travelling performers, accustomed to halls where cold drove audiences close to smoking fires and heat made extended performances unbearable, found at Montfort an environment where they could practice their art in optimal conditions. The castle became a centre of culture, drawing visitors who came for entertainment but stayed to marvel at the building itself. Most importantly for Lord William's ambitions, his garrison remained healthier than those of rival lords. Soldiers suffered fewer winter ailments, the respiratory infections and joint problems that plagued troops in cold, damp quarters. Summer brought fewer heat-related fevers and exhaustion. A healthy garrison meant a more effective military force, and word of Montfort's unusual advantages spread among the warrior class. But success bred danger. Knowledge this valuable couldn't remain secret forever, despite the oaths Roland had required from his workers. Spies arrived in the guise of travelling merchants, their real mission to map the hidden channels and understand the system's principles. They measured walls, studied air vents, and asked seemingly innocent questions about the castle's construction. One night, masked intruders attempted something even more audacious. They tried to kidnap young Thomas the Mason, clearly hoping to force Roland's secrets from his most trusted apprentice. Only the vigilance of Sir Gerald's guards prevented the abduction, but the attempt sent a clear message. Powerful forces wanted access to Roland's revolutionary knowledge, with or without his consent. The master builder understood the implications. His innovations were too valuable to remain unprotected, too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. Knowledge of heating and cooling systems could provide military advantages. Comfortable troops fought better than miserable ones. Castles that could house larger garrisons year-round held strategic value. The ability to create comfortable environments might even influence the outcomes of sieges and campaigns. Roland also recognized a deeper truth. His methods represented more than just improved construction techniques. They embodied a fundamental shift in how humans related to their built environment. Instead of accepting discomfort as inevitable, instead of viewing buildings as mere shelters that provided minimal protection from the elements, his approach demonstrated that structures could actively enhance human life. This philosophy was revolutionary in ways that extended far beyond architecture. Medieval society accepted suffering as natural, divinely ordained, a necessary part of earthly existence. The idea that human comfort was achievable, that environment could be controlled and optimized, challenged basic assumptions about how people should live. As Roland watched noble visitors experience his hall's impossible comfort, as he saw the transformation in how people behaved when freed from constant environmental stress, he understood that he had unleashed forces that would reshape medieval civilization. The question was no longer whether his innovations would spread, but how quickly they would transform the world beyond Montfort's walls. But first, he had to ensure that this knowledge survived and prospered, protected from those who would steal it and guided by those who understood its true significance. The aging master builder faced choices that would determine not just his own legacy, but the future of human comfort itself. By 1350, Master Roland de Byzantium faced the weight of time and the burden of revolutionary knowledge. His hands, once steady enough to calculate tolerances measured in fractions of inches, now trembled with age. His eyes, which had once read the subtle language of wind and shadow across Montfort's grounds, struggled with the fine details of architectural drawings. But his mind, his brilliant, innovative mind, burned with urgency about the future of everything he had created. The attempted kidnapping of Thomas the Mason had been a warning, but it was far from the only threat. Powerful lords across England were demanding Roland's services, and their requests carried the weight of barely concealed commands. The Earl of Chester wanted a heated castle. The Bishop of Winchester required a cool scriptorium for his monastery. King Henry himself had sent inquiries about improving the royal apartments at Westminster. Each request represented both opportunity and danger opportunity to spread beneficial knowledge, danger that his secrets might be stolen, corrupted, or lost. Rowland understood what many innovators throughout history have learned. Revolutionary knowledge is never safe in the hands of a single person. Death, accident, or betrayal could erase centuries of accumulated wisdom in a moment. His techniques needed both preservation and protection, documentation and discretion. The solution he devised was as ingenious as his architectural innovations. Rowland selected 5 additional apprentices beyond Thomas the Mason and Jean de Rouen, choosing them not just for their skill with stone and mortar, but for something far more important, their character. These were men who understood that knowledge carried responsibility, that some secrets required guardianship rather than mere possession. These 7 masters became the founding members of what they called the Guild of Compass and Stone, a secretive organization unlike the typical medieval guild. Where ordinary guilds existed to regulate trades and protect local interests, the Guild of Compass and Stone existed to preserve and carefully disseminate revolutionary architectural knowledge. Its members would be recognizable to each other through subtle symbols carved into their buildings. A compass rose hidden in a door frame, a particular arrangement of stones that spelled out mathematical relationships, geometric patterns that carried encoded meaning. Rowland spent his final years creating an extraordinary manuscript that he called the Codex Thermae, the Book of Heat. But this wasn't simply a construction manual. The document was a masterpiece of layered knowledge, designed to reveal its secrets gradually to those properly trained to understand them. The surface text appeared to be standard building instructions, the kind of practical advice any competent mason might need. Specifications for mortar, descriptions of foundation techniques, guidance on selecting timber, all perfectly conventional. But hidden within these mundane instructions were mathematical formulae expressed in symbolic language, geometric diagrams that revealed the true principles of thermal dynamics, and architectural drawings that showed how to create the impossible, buildings that breathed. Only those trained in the guild's methods could read between the lines, recognizing that certain measurements weren't just structural requirements but thermal calculations, that particular arrangements of stones created specific airflow patterns, that window placements followed solar mathematics disguised as aesthetic choices. The manuscript was copied 7 times, one for each founding member of the guild, and each copy was guarded as carefully as any cathedral's most sacred relics. The knowledge would survive even if individual masters perished, but it would never fall into unprepared hands. When the plague came to England in 1348, that devastating pandemic that killed 1/3 of Europe's population, Rowland worked with feverish intensity to complete one final project. In Montfort's chapel, he incorporated every innovation he had ever developed: hypercaust heating, air circulation systems, solar orientation, thermal mass calculations. This small building became a teaching model, a 3-dimensional textbook where future generations could study his methods directly. The chapel served another purpose as well. During the plague years, when other religious buildings became death traps where infection spread rapidly through crowded, poorly ventilated spaces, Rowland's chapel provided a sanctuary where fresh air circulation and comfortable temperatures created conditions that helped people resist disease. The building itself became a demonstration that proper architecture could save lives. On his deathbed in the winter of 1350, surrounded by his 7 master apprentices, Rowland revealed the deepest principle behind all his innovations. Buildings, he told them, were living things that must work in harmony with natural forces rather than against them. Stone and mortar were just materials. The true architecture lay in understanding how air moved, how heat transferred, how human bodies responded to their environment. This wasn't just construction philosophy. It was a revolutionary worldview that challenged medieval assumptions about humanity's relationship with the natural world. Instead of viewing nature as something to be endured or conquered, Rowland's approach suggested that human comfort and natural forces could work together, that technology could enhance rather than oppose natural processes. The legacy spread across medieval Europe in ways both obvious and subtle. Thomas the Mason carried Rowland's principles to London, where he influenced the design of Westminster Abbey's revolutionary chapter house. The building's innovative air circulation and thermal properties created an environment where Parliament could meet in comfort year-round, contributing to the development of England's governmental institutions. Jean de Rouen returned to France and quietly incorporated Roland's innovations into Loire Valley castles, creating noble residences that attracted the finest courts of medieval Europe. The improved living conditions in these castles contributed to the flowering of courtly culture, the development of refined arts, and literature that emerged when people could live comfortably, enough to focus on intellectual pursuits. The Guild of Compass and Stone grew carefully, its members spreading across Europe like seeds carried by wind. By 1400, nearly every major cathedral and palace in Western Europe incorporated some variation of Roland's innovations, though few understood their true origin. The hypocaust systems evolved into more sophisticated heating methods. The double walls influenced the development of cavity wall construction that wouldn't become standard until centuries later. The orientation principles became accepted practice among the most skilled architects. Most remarkably, Roland's emphasis on human comfort in architecture helped spark a broader transformation in medieval society. Universities flourished in buildings designed with proper heating and ventilation. Extended court cultures developed in palaces where people could gather comfortably year-round. The arts and learning that would eventually bloom into the Renaissance grew partly from environments that supported rather than hindered human intellectual activity. The master builder from Byzantium had achieved something extraordinary. He had not merely changed how buildings were made, he had changed how people lived within them, how they thought about comfort and possibility, how they understood the relationship between human needs and architectural innovation. His techniques would evolve, improve, and spread across continents. Central heating, air conditioning, passive solar design, thermal efficiency. All these modern concepts trace their lineage back to that revolutionary winter, when a foreign master builder first demonstrated that buildings could breathe, that human comfort was achievable, that architecture could work with nature rather than against it. But perhaps Roland's greatest legacy was the idea itself, that the built environment should serve human flourishing, that innovation was not just possible but necessary, that knowledge carefully preserved and wisely shared could transform civilization one building at a time. In the end, Master Roland de Byzantium had done what every true innovator dreams of achieving. He had taken knowledge from the past, applied it to present needs, and created possibilities that would shape the future for centuries to come. The Guild of Compass and Stone would guard his secrets and guide their application, ensuring that the revolutionary principles first demonstrated in a freezing English castle would continue to warm human lives across the medieval world and beyond. The winter had indeed come to Montfort Castle, but from that cold had emerged innovations that would keep humanity warm for generations yet to come.